All right, this lesson is on completing the square. It's an additional method for solving quadratic equations for two possible solutions. This can actually allow you to solve for real and imaginary. And so we're going to begin with a builder. This is a builder for building squares, and it's going to help establish the foundation. I'm going to move over here an x square. Then I'm going to move in an x tile, and I'm going to move in a second x tile. And I want to ask you about completing the square. How many ones units would I need to complete the square? Well, if I completed this square, I would only need one ones unit. And this would actually turn out to be x square tile. There would be two x tiles. And then I would only need one of the units tiles. And that would complete the square. Okay, that would make a perfect square. What if I pull in an additional x tile here and here, and I'm going to leave that one there? How many total one units would I need to complete the square? I think I would need that one that was already there, plus a second, plus a third, plus a fourth. And that would make a perfect square. Everything would be the same across the top and the bottom. That one would be x squared plus 1, 2, 3, 4 x's, and I would have 1, 2, 3, 4 ones units. And that would be a perfect square. What I'm actually creating here are perfect square trinomials. Perfect square trinomials. All right, let's do another one. How many would I need to complete this square? I think I would need the 4 that I already have, plus a fifth, a sixth, a seventh, an eighth, and a ninth. Okay, and that would make a perfect square trinomial. And if we write this one down, we have x squared plus 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 x's plus 9. All right, before we go any farther, let's just see if we see a pattern here. And the pattern that I want you to see, if you can understand, is I want to look at the middle number, the b value, the number in front of x. And I want to do what we call half it. Then we want to square it. And I think if we half it, then square it, we will be able to predict how many ones units it would take to complete a perfect square. So if I took half of 2 is 1. 1 squared is 1. What's half of 4? Half of 4 is 2. Take 2 and square it, we get 4. Half of 6 is 3. 3 squared is 9. So let me just see if you can predict what it would take to complete the square. What if I made this 8 x's? How many would we need to complete the square? Just imagine if I filled in a couple more x's, how many more would I need to complete the square? Or how many total would I need? Well, I think you can see that I would end up needing a total of how many? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16. I think I need a total of 16 units to complete this square. And if we half the middle number, half of 8 is 4. 4 squared is 16. So this is going to set us up to do our lesson on completing the square. We are completing the square. We're trying to find out what number we need to complete the square of a perfect trinomial. All right. Now, I'm only going to leave this slide up here because those of you that were absent might have missed what we did in the introduction, and this was a warm-up. We are getting ready to take a quiz, and it would be a quiz on the methods prior to completing the square. So this is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. Now, I'm not going to linger on this very long because you can always stop the video, rewind the video, work out the problems so that it might help you get ready for the upcoming quiz. All right, let's go ahead and begin. All right, these are our warm-up problems. Let's go ahead and begin. I'm looking on the left, and I happen to notice the middle term is 14, and I'm going to remember half it then square it. Do I have a perfect square trinomial on the left? Well, half of 14 is 7. 7 squared is 49. So what I have on the left is a perfect square trinomial. So let's just see if we can solve this. I believe a perfect square trinomial will factor into two parentheses just alike. And notice that for now, I'm not doing anything with the 4. I'm going to leave the 4 on the right-hand side. This factors into x and x. 49 factors into 7 and 7. And I believe it needs to be plus 7 plus 7. That perfect square trinomial happens to factor into two sets of parentheses that are exactly the same. So I can actually write this as x plus 7 squared equal to 4. Now I'm going to actually solve this with the square roots method. So I'm going to take the square root of both sides, and the square root and the square cancel. So what I get out is x plus 7. And after you take the square root, the very next step you need to remember your plus or minus, and square root of 4 is 2. Now I'm not finished yet. I need to take the 7 over here, and that's going to make it negative 7. So that's going to be negative 7 plus or minus 2. So my two answers, I need to do one operation at a time. Negative 7 plus 2 is negative 5. Negative 7 minus 2 is negative 9. The two answers are negative 5 and negative 9. All right, this is just an additional way to solve. Okay, we're going to take the same approach on the next. If I double check the left, I'm looking for a perfect square trinomial. Again, we're going to half it, then square it. Half of negative 6. Half of negative 6 is negative 3. But then I'm going to square negative 3, and I have to remember it's a negative times a negative, so it does make positive 9. So I do have a perfect square trinomial. I'm not going to do anything to the 20 right now. Now, if I factor this, I end up with x and x, and I believe it's going to be 3 times 3 is 9, and then negative 3 plus negative 3 adds to be negative 6. Now, that's two parentheses that are exactly the same, so I can abbreviate it and write it like this, equal to 20. I'm going to use the roots method again, so square root of both sides. Square it in a square, I get x minus 3 is equal to, I'm going to change that to radical 4 times 5, or 4 times 5. The square root of 4 comes out as a 2. So that's going to be 2 square root of 5. 5 does not come out. Don't forget what? Plus or minus. Now, I need to take the 3 over so that I get x by itself. That's going to be positive 3. My answer is x equals positive 3 plus or minus 2 square root of 5. Now, the other day when we did the quadratic formula, you were allowed to leave your answer in radical form. This is the correct answer in radical form because this will not give me whole numbers. These are going to be decimals. We can also change this to decimal form. So let's grab our calculators, and I'm going to type in 3 plus 2 square root of 5. And of course, I have the old calculator, so I'll close my parentheses. My first answer is 7.47. 7.47. I'll remember that. Now, to get the second answer, we're going to actually subtract these two. Okay, remember we added them. Now we're going to subtract them. I'm not going to retype that. I'm going to do second entry, and I'm going to backspace till I get to the plus, and we'll change it to subtraction. You don't have to arrow back to the end. You just press enter, and my answer is negative 1.47. So my two answers turn out to be 7.47 and negative 1.47. So that would be your radical form and your decimal form. Now, I need you to know that the first answer is actually the best answer. And when you go to pre-cal and calculus, you'll leave a lot of your answers in radical form because they're exact. When you change things to decimals, you get an approximation. So this is acceptable. I do think you'll see this on ACT, SAT, possible placement tests, but I need you to understand that they can be answered in two forms. All right, let's go on to the actual. Okay, these are the steps for completing the square. We are always going to rewrite it, and we're going to move the C value to the right. Okay, so remember, we're trying to complete a perfect square, and if the number they've given us isn't, we're going to move it out of the way. If we have an extra number a in front of x squared, we will divide that out. And then we come up to the phrase that Ms. Jessup's already said, half it, then what? Square it. That's the key. And we'll add that to both sides. We're going to factor, take the square root of both sides, and solve just like we did. Let's just jump in. Number 3. First thing I want to do is we know we're going to use the approach completing the square. So we're going to look at the middle term. The middle term is negative 18. Half it is negative 9. Negative 9 squared is 81. 56 is not the number I need to complete the square, so I'm actually going to move 56 to the other side. And when I move 56 to the other side, it becomes negative 56. So I'm going to have x squared minus 18x, and I know I need 81, remember half it, then square it, to complete the square. Now if you just throw in 81 because that's what we need, we have to also throw in 81 on the other side. Remember, what you do to one side of the equation, you must do to the other side of the equation. So now I'm going to factor to two sets of parentheses. I think they should be identical, and they are. And then negative 56 plus 81, I believe, becomes 25. Now, if I rewrite this as x minus 9 squared equal to 25, I can now use the roots method to finish, and I'm going to get x minus 9 is equal to 5. Don't forget what? Plus or minus. Now, if I take the 9 over here, it's going to be 9 plus or minus 5. And I need to make sure I do both operations. So 9 plus 5 is 14. And then 9 minus 5 is 4. Okay? My two answers are 14 and 4. Number 4. This is the first one we've seen where we have a number in front of x squared. So the number I have in front of x squared is 2. If I go back up to my steps, the second step specifically says divide both sides by a. So that means I need to divide it out so that I end up with x squared. So I'm going to divide this by 2, divide this by 2, and this by 2. If you divide one thing by 2, you need to divide everything by 2. So I will get x squared minus 8x, and then I'm going to come over here equal negative 15. Now the 2 has been divided away. Now I can complete my square. Half of negative 8 is negative 4. Negative 4 squared is 16. I need 16, and if I add 16 to one side, I must add 16 to the other side. Now, this is going to factor into two sets of parentheses that are exactly the same. We've done those perfect square trinomials now for a couple of times. We're going to go straight to the squares. And it always matches the term of the middle, and it's always half. So when it says half of 8, half of 8 is 4. 4 times 4 would be 16. And then 4x and 4x, because you would get two terms the same, would be, negative 8x. Take the square root of both sides. X minus 4 is equal to 1. Don't forget what? Plus or minus. And if I move the 4 over here, I get x is equal to 4 plus or minus 1. So x is equal to 5 and 3. So far, so good. Number 5. First thing we're going to do is we're going to get rid of the number in front of x squared. So we're going to divide out the 4, divide out the 4, divide out the 4. When I do that, I get x squared minus 2x. I'm going to leave some space, equals to negative 3/4. That one did not divide out. We are in honors, so we are expected to work with fractions. Let's go to the middle term. Half of negative 2 is negative 1. Negative 1 times negative 1, when you square it, becomes positive 1. I'm going to add 1 to this side, and I'm going to add 1 to this side. Now that side I'm adding fractions. When you add fractions, it's easier if you have a common denominator. So the common denominator is 4 over 4. I can rewrite 1 as 4/4, and I have it exactly where I want it. This is going to factor into 2 sets of parentheses, squared, because they're going to be the same. It's going to be x minus the half. Half of -2 is 1, and that's what always goes in the parentheses. -3/4 plus 4/4 turns out to be 1/4, which that's actually a very nice fraction if I'm going to be working with square roots. Square root of a square, I get x minus 1. And this time the square root of 1/4, remember, don't forget what? Plus or minus. It's always in the very next step after you take square root that you got to remember your plus or minus. Now that square root sign goes with the 1, and the square root goes with the bottom 4. Square root of 1 on top is 1. Square root of 4 on the bottom is 2. So that becomes 1/2. At least to be a fraction, 1/2 is the easiest fraction, I think, to work with. So now I'm going to move the 1 to the other side. So it's going to be x is equal to 1 plus or minus 1/2. Well, 1 plus a half is 1.5, or 3/2. Okay, that would be the same thing as 1.5. And then 1 minus a half is a half. Or if you prefer, you can write it as 1.5 and 0.5. Either way you choose to write the final answer, either way is correct. Okay, that was 5. Now 6. Okay, number 6. First thing I want to do is I'm going to divide by the number in front of x squared. And yuck of all yucks, everything is not going to be nice and neat, but we have to be able to work with those, so we're going to plow through it. I get x squared. I get 10/3 x. And I'm going to bet that 8/3 is not what I need to complete the square, so I'm going to move it to the other side. 0 divided by 3 is 0. So when I take 8/3 over here, I'm going to end up subtracting 8/3, which is going to equal -8/3. I hope that step was good. Now, we're going to have to do the same thing. We're going to half it, then square it. So, when I say half of 10/3, it's like 1/2 times 10/3. You multiply the numerators, you get 10. You multiply the denominators, you get 6. That actually reduces. So if I reduce 10/6, I believe I get 5/3. Okay, now remember, that was just the half, which half of 10/3 would be 5/3. Now we have to square it. Remember, we halved it, and we got 5/3. So that's the half. Now we're getting ready to square it. And when you square it, you square the numerator, and you square the denominator. So squaring a fraction turns out to be 25/9. I need to add 25/9. That means I need to add 25/9 to both sides. I'm going to pause, let that soak in a little bit. If you need to stop the video, rewind, look at it again. I'm going through with a fraction example. We are in honors, and I think there's a good chance that you might see one of these. Okay, I'm going to erase this work here because I need to move forward. I now need to factor this side squared, and it turned out that the half number always goes in what was here, so it's going to be x plus, what was it, 5/3, okay, equal to, now I need to add fractions, and like I said, adding fractions, I do need a common denominator, so I'm going to change this one to 9ths. This one's already 9ths, it's 25/9. So if I change it, I multiply the denominator times 3. So if I multiply the numerator times 3, I get -24. So now I have -24/9 plus 25/9, I believe, gives me what? 1/9. So it's going to be x plus 5/3 squared equals 1/9. Now we're down to the part that we know how to do. Take the square root of both sides. So I get x plus 5/3 is equal to plus or minus, and remember that square root goes with the numerator and the denominator, so I do get 1/3. Actually came out to be a lot neater and nicer than I first thought. I'm going to move this over here. It becomes -5/3. So x is going to equal, now I can add and subtract fractions since the denominators are already the same. -5 plus 1 is -4/3, because I use the plus. Now I'm going to do the subtraction. -5 minus 1/3 is -6/3, which is the same thing as -2. My two answers are -4/3 and -2. And taking a look at that, that is as complicated of a completing the square problem as you will ever see. If I were faced with the idea of having to complete the square and working with those kind of hard fractions or not so nice fractions, I would probably fall back to quadratic formula. Remember, this is just another method of trying to find two different answers. So Miss Jessup may take these fraction problems off the table. Maybe you'll see them in a bonus. So number 6 was a little bit of a challenge. I do think it's something you can do, but again, may take it off the table, and it will be something that you will see maybe in a bonus. All right, number 7. Let's do number 7. All right, first thing I see is I don't see any fractions. I don't have to divide this time. I do see, though, that I have -21. And since I'm thinking that's not going to complete my square, I'm going to move it over here. So I'm going to end up adding 21. Okay, so that gets rid of -21. So I get x squared plus 16x's equal to, I think that's 16 when I add on the right. Now, half the middle number is 8. 8 squared is 64. So I'm going to add 64 here and add 64 here. All right. Now, this is going to it's going to be two parentheses just the same. So it's going to be x plus 8. It's always the half number that goes in the parentheses. And I believe 16 plus 64 is 80. Take the square root of both sides. You get x plus 8 is equal to, we can simplify this off to the side. I believe that's 16 times 5. Now, 16 comes out as a 4. So this is going to be 4 radical 5. And don't forget what? Plus or minus. Now I'm almost finished. I need to take the plus 8 over here, and it's going to be what? -8 when I move it across the equals. So that's -8 plus or minus 4 square root of 5. In my eyes, that is the complete answer. Now keep in mind, that's the same as if you wrote it separately, -8 plus 4 square root of 5 and -8 minus 4 square root of 5, that represents two answers. When we say plus or minus, that also represents, guess what? Two answers. And I'm okay with leaving it in the radical form. If you would like to type it in your calculator, I believe we would have -8 plus 4 square root 5, -0.94, and then if we do second entry and do the subtraction, we get -16.94. So I'm okay if you just leave it in radical form. I'm also okay if you want to know where it would appear on the number line to change it to a decimal. So that would be our two additional answers if you wanted to. X equals 0.94 and -16.94, I believe, were the two answers. So this is just simply the decimal form, and the other is simply the radical form. All right, let's try number 8. Number 8, I do need to divide out the 3. I get x squared minus 10x, leaving some space. I believe that gives me 23. That doesn't mean to look like 23. What was I doing? 23. There we go. Half of 10. Half of 10 is 5. -5, actually. -5 squared turns out to be positive 25. So I'm going to add 25 to both sides. I'm going to end up getting 9 minus 5 squared is equal to 48. And this one should be getting a little bit more comfortable. I hope you're getting more comfortable. Taking the square root of a square cancels. X minus 5 is equal to, that turns out to be 16 times 3. square root of 16, it comes out as a what? 4. So that becomes 4 radical 3. Don't forget what? Plus or minus. And I'm going to bring the 5 over. Becomes positive 5. X is equal to positive 5 plus or minus 4 square root of 3. I am fine with leaving it like that. I don't have to have the decimal, but if you want to, you can change it to decimal. Okay, last two. One thing I'm going to see is I think 12, if I half it, I get 6. 6 squared is 36. I need a 36, which means 43 is not the number I need. I'm going to move it to the right. Okay, we know we need 36. So x squared plus 12x. I'm going to move the 43, which makes it negative 43 on the right. We know we need 36. I'm going to add 36 because that's the number I need to complete the square. So I'm going to add 36 to the right. This is going to factor into two parentheses that are identical. It's going to be half of 12, which is positive 6. Negative 43 plus 36, I believe, is negative 7. Negative 7. First time we've gotten a negative on the right side. Take the square root of both sides. We get x plus 6 is equal to square root of negative 7. And you can't forget what? Plus or minus. Don't forget the very next step after you square root both sides, you got to put plus or minus. Now, the 7 does not reduce. Okay, we can't change the 7. 7 can't come out. It's going to stay under there. But what about the negative sign? It should come out as a what? Letter I. Very good. Don't forget the I. So this is going to be plus or minus I square root 7. I also need to bring the 6 over. If I bring the 6 over, it's going to end up being what? Negative 6. So I'm going to get negative 6 plus or minus I square root of 7. Okay? Negative 6 plus or minus. This is it's not a real answer. There is no decimal version because there's nowhere on the number line that this answer will appear. This is one of our complex or imaginary numbers. This is technically a complex number, and the reason it's complex is because it's got a real part plus it's got an imaginary part. Okay, the 6 is a real number. But the I square root 7 is imaginary. So that's actually a complex answer, and you would have to write all of that answer in order for it to be correct. Okay, number 10. First thing I need to do is the number in front of my x squared, I'm going to divide it out. I also need to pay attention to something else. My 16x is in the wrong place. My 16x needs to be brought over here and dropped in the middle. It should be the middle term. So I'm going to kind of kill two birds with one stone. I'm going to divide out the 4, and I'm going to move my x over. Okay. Now, if I move my x over, what other thing needs to be moved? I'm going to bet that number is probably not what I need. I'm going to move it over here. That's a lot in one step. See if you can keep up. So I'm just going to divide this out. X squared stays on this side. I moved in the green. I'm going to move the 16 divided by 4. 16 divided by 4 is 4x. And that should be negative 4x, Penny. Negative 4x. All right. I'm going to leave some space. Equals. Now I move 26 divided by 4. 26 divided by 4, 76 divided by 4, I think, is 19. And that's going to end up being negative 19 over here. Okay. Yeah, that works. All right. I think I remembered everything. Pause, make sure. Remove the 76 over 4 over here. It became negative. We moved 16 divided by 4 over here to the left. It became negative. Now, half it, then square it. Half would be negative 2. Squared would be 4. I need to add 4 to both sides. Okay. Now, what do we factor x minus 4x plus 4 in? What's x? And then 2 times 2 would be 4. And they're going to be negative 2. There would be two parentheses just like that. That gives me negative 15. Take the square root of both sides. You get x minus 2 is equal to the square root of 15. I can't forget what? Plus or minus. The I is going to pop up again because the square root of negative, that's going to come out as an I. 15, though, cannot come out. So that part has to stay underneath the square root sign. And I'm going to get, my 2 is going to move over here, and it's going to become 2. My final answer is positive 2 plus or minus I square root of 15. And again, that's a complex answer with an imaginary root. It does not appear on the number line. Okay, that is the notes on completing the square.